The alley was too quiet. 15 Americans and a handful of local fighters moved down it anyway, boots scraping on broken concrete, gear rattling just loud enough to drown out the warning in their headsets. Sunlight hit the far end of the passage like a wall, forcing their eyes to fight between shadow and glare. Dust hung in the air, stirred by their movement, clinging to uniforms already stained with a dozen other missions. Viper 1, Overwatch, a calm female voice cut in on the net. Recommend you do not commit to that alley. Multiple choke points, restricted maneuver. I've got better routes 2 blocks north. The advisory team's platoon leader, a young lieutenant with sand-colored hair plastered to his forehead, barely turned his head. He had one eye on his tablet, the other on the local partner force ahead of him. Copy, Overwatch, he said, breath a little too fast. We're good. Intel has this sector cleared. Stay sharp up there. Her voice came back, still even. Roger, I'm sharp. Still advising alternate route. Lots of blind. The rest of her sentence vanished in the roar of a PKM opening up from a second-story window on the left. The first bow slammed into the column like a hammer. One of the local fighters dropped instantly, his body folding at the waist. Another American went down hard, his plate carrier taking rounds but dumping him onto his back. Contact left. Contact left. The alley exploded into chaos. Rounds chewed into walls, spitting concrete back into faces and eyes. Someone screamed for a medic. Someone else screamed without words at all. The lieutenant dove behind a cracked doorway, trying to get a read on anything beyond the dust and debris. Where is it? Where the hell is it? A specialist shouted, pressing into the right side wall, trying to make himself smaller than his rifle. Then came the second hit. An RPG slammed into a parked, burnt-out car near the mouth of the alley they'd just passed. The explosion punched the air out of everyone's lungs, filling the passage with smoke and fresh panic. The exit behind them was now a blazing, twisted mass of metal and flame. Viper 1 is troops in contact. Troops in contact. The RTO yelled into his handset, voice cracking. Grid. His transmission overlapped with 3 others. Doc. Doc. I got one down. I got one down. His hit in the leg. His bleeding. We need air. We need CAS on standby. Now. Through the crashing noise of gunfire and overlapping calls, the female voice came back into everyone's headset, steady and clipped, like she was in another world entirely. Overwatch has eyes. Machine gun. Second floor. Third window from the left. Tan building with a satellite dish. RPG team. Side street at your 3 o'clock behind blue door. Half open. You need to push 3 bodies to the left side now. Overwatch. Stand by. The lieutenant snapped, trying to get control of his own people. Viper. Push forward. Push forward. Get out of the alley. Except forward was already closing. At the far end, 2 figures appeared. Then 4. Then more. Shapes weaving behind broken cars and chunks of concrete. Muzzle flashes flickered in the glare. The alley had become exactly what the voice on the net had warned about. A bullet funnel with no clean exit. Lieutenant, you've got both ends closing. You cannot push forward, the Overwatch voice said, still calm. Listen to me. I need you to. Overwatch, I said stand by. A round smacked into the wall inches from the lieutenant's helmet, spraying his face with powdered brick. He flinched, instinctively ducking lower. Medic! I need a medic now! Someone shouted from deeper in the alley. I can't see them. I can't see them! Another voice broke. The radio became a storm. Requests for air. Someone calling for hire. The RTO trying to read a grid he could barely see under shaking hands. In the middle of it all, her voice kept cutting in, offering building descriptions, clock positions, options. To most of the men pinned in that alley, she might as well have been a GPS app in the background. Noise. A support asset. Not the person whose job was literally to see farther than they could imagine. Above them, several blocks away on a dusty rooftop, Staff Sergeant Elena Cruz lay behind her rifle. The world looked different through her scope. Not chaos, but angles. Not noise, but patterns. She tracked the PKM's muzzle flashes, watched the RPG man duck back, counted seconds between bursts. Her breathing was slow, almost out of place against the frantic voices pumping into her ears. "Viper, this is Overwatch," she said again, a hint of steel under the calm now. "You are in a complex ambush. You've got maybe minutes before they collapse both ends completely. You need to listen." Down in the alley, one of the Americans who'd been laughing that morning pressed his helmet into the grit, knuckles white on his rifle. He saw blood spreading under his buddy's leg, saw no way forward and nothing behind but fire. Panic stripped the bravado out of his voice. "We're gonna lose everyone out here," he shouted into the radio, not caring who heard it. "We're gonna lose everyone." The words cracked over the net and hung there. Up on the rooftop, Cruz kept her cheek welded to the stock, her eye steady behind glass, watching 15 lives bleed time away under her scope, her voice the only calm thing in their world, and the last one anyone seemed ready to listen to. 24 hours earlier, Raqqa had been quieter, but never truly quiet. The city's broken skyline sat under a pale morning sun, the air heavy with dust and the smell of old fires. On a rooftop that overlooked a maze of streets and alleys, Staff Sergeant Elena Cruz sat cross-legged beside her rifle, a small notebook open in front of her. She wasn't big. Medium height, lean, sleeves rolled tight against her forms. Dark hair braided close, tucked neatly under her helmet when it was on. To anyone passing her in a chow line or hallway, she could have been any staff NCO, supply, admin, maybe intel. The kind of person people assumed lived in fluorescent-lit offices, not behind glass at 600 meters. Her hands told a different story. Gloves off, fingers moved with practiced muscle memory along the barrel and action of her rifle, wiping away invisible grit, checking for anything that might throw off a shot by even a fraction. The bolt came out, went back in. She checked the scope mounts, then the bipod, then the sling. It was the same ritual every day. Not superstition, but habit carved by years of knowing that when things went bad, this piece of metal and glass might be the only thing between someone breathing and not. Beside her, inside the open lid of a Pelican case, a small, faded unit patch lay tucked into the foam, a subdued emblem from a brigade that had pushed through Baghdad and Diyala when she was still in her 20s. The edges of the patch were frayed. She never wore it on her sleeve, but she carried it everywhere. Back then, she hadn't been a sniper. She'd been intel. In 2007, Iraq had taught her that maps lie and people don't. Streets told stories long before locals did. She'd spent night after night hunched over feeds and reports, learning how patterns formed, how routes repeated, how certain corners always seemed to attract trouble. While others saw lines and grids, she saw behavior. While others chased dots on screens, she learned to read the way a car parked slightly wrong or door left half open could mean the difference between a routine patrol and names on a memorial. But she'd watched too many times from a distance as patrols went out on those streets, got hit, and came back with fewer people. Intel got thanked in briefings and forgotten on the ground. When combat arms finally opened up, she put in a packet, half expecting it to get laughed out of a Battalion S1 office. It didn't. Sniper school had been its own war. Long days, longer nights. She wasn't the biggest. She wasn't the loudest. She didn't tell stories about bar fights or flex at the range. She just listened, watched, and shot. When calls became a language she spoke fluently. Range estimation turned into instinct. By the time they pinned her graduation certificate, she wasn't just the intel chick who somehow ended up here. She was one of the top shooters in the class. Some people respected that. Others resented it quietly. A few filed it away under political outcomes, assuming someone somewhere wanted a woman on the success roster. Then came the deployment where she lost her spotter. Northern Iraq. A hasty exfil, a bad piece of intel about enemy positions, a round that found the only exposed sliver of his body. She had him in her hands when he went, his blood on her sleeves, his last words an apology for something that hadn't been his fault. After that, she stopped talking much about work. No war stories in the smoke pit. No self-promotion. Just reports, range time, and another patch tucked away. Her reputation lived in the fine print. A Navy commendation with vise, a line in a battalion sitrep there. Her name was known in the places that read after-action reviews. It wasn't known in the places that only listened to whoever talked the loudest. Now, in Raqqa, she'd been assigned as overwatch for an advisory team operating with local partners. On paper, it made perfect sense. She had the experience, the skill set, the deployment history. On the ground, it looked different. To some, she was a checkbox, proof that the battalion was integrating talent. To others, especially the ones who hadn't read past the first page of her file, she was just a support NCO with a fancy rifle. That morning, as the city slowly woke up, Cruz lay behind his scope and studied the angles. Her notebook was already filled with sketches, streets bending around collapsed buildings, rooftop lines, high points, dead space. She marked likely ambush sites, where an alley narrowed just enough, where a balcony offered a perfect field of fire, where a side street connected to an open lot that could hide a vehicle. Her pen circled one narrow alley twice. Limited lateral movement. Good cover positions on both ends. Multiple access points from flanking streets. If she'd been planning an attack, she would have loved that alley. She paged back through her notes, checking wind patterns she'd recorded at different times of day, then glanced up at the sky. It would be hot later, heat shimmer making long shots harder. She accounted for it anyway. Inside the building below, a younger lieutenant was finishing his mission brief with his team, voice confident, easy. Cruz could hear it faintly through the open staircase. He sounded like a dozen other officers she'd worked with, smart, ambitious, sure that his plan would hold up once it met the street. She knew better. Plans broke. Angles didn't. When they'd first landed in theater, she'd shaken his hand in a cramped TOC. He'd looked surprised when he realized she was the sniper he'd been assigned. It had been there in his eyes for a second, a flicker, quickly buried under professionalism. "Good to have you on the team, Staff Sergeant," he'd said. "We'll make good use of you." A few days later, she was still waiting to be used for more than a name on a slide. That morning, as she circled the alley again in her notebook, she keyed her radio and asked for a few minutes in the route planning huddle. She had a list of concerns and alternatives. By the time she got downstairs, half the decisions had already been made. Her competence wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It quietly filled notebooks and range cards, marked danger zones and safe havens. And in a world that often rewarded volume over value, that kind of competence was far too easy to ignore. The temporary operations center looked like every other half-fixed building in the city, concrete scars on the outside, improvised order on the inside. Cots, crates, maps taped to walls that used to hold family photos. In one corner, someone had rigged a power strip into a tangle of cords trying to feed radios, laptops, and one stubborn coffee maker. The advisory team moved through it in a practice blur. It was strapped tighter, plates adjusted, radios checked. Local partners laughed among themselves near the doorway, AKS slung, waiting for the Americans to signal it was time to roll. Cruz didn't stand in the middle of it. She never did. She sat on a low wall near the entrance to the stairwell, loading magazines with slow, efficient movements. One round at a time, thumb pressing brass into polymer, the steady click of rounds stacking. Beside her, her rifle lay in its case, lid open, glass already spotless. An anemometer rested next to it, the tiny device that had more say in her world than most people realized. "Hey, you see this?" one of the younger soldiers said, voice pitched just a bit too loud as he pulled on his gloves. "We got ourselves a PR sniper today. Gonna look great on the brigade Instagram." His buddy snorted. "Bet she won't even fire a round. Man, if I had that job, I'd just sunbathe on the roof and call it combat pay." They both laughed, that easy, nervous kind of humor that fills the minutes before a patrol. Neither of them looked her way. They didn't have to. The joke only worked if she could hear it. Cruz didn't rise to it. She tapped the last round into the mag, gave it a quick press check, and set it aside with the others. Her eyes flicked up once, calm, then back to her work. Across the room, the platoon leader, Viper 1, was standing over a map laid across a folding table. He used a grease pencil to trace their route, circling key intersections, talking through contingencies with a staff sergeant and the team's JTAC. His tone was confident, almost rehearsed. This wasn't his first brief. So we push down this main, link with the partner force here, then cut over to this district and work our way south, he said, tapping the map. Should be low-key. Sector got cleared last week, so we're just showing presence and checking on a few problem spots. He looked up as Cruz approached, tucking a loaded mag into a pouch. There's our insurance policy, he said with a grin that was meant to be friendly. Staff Sergeant, you'll be up top as usual. Keep us honest if you see anything we don't. Roger, sir, she said. I'd like to talk through your route real quick. I've been mapping angles the last few days. Perfect, he said, already turning back to the map. We're taking this path, hey? She stepped closer, scanning the lines, matching them to the mental map she'd built for her rooftop surveys. You're running through this alley, she asked, tapping the narrow passage she'd circled twice in her notebook. Yeah, cuts time, he said. Locals say it's clear, and Intel has nothing in that grid right now. It's a perfect funnel, she said, voice even. Limited lateral movement, multiple vantage points for enfilade fire. There are at least 3 buildings with second-story windows overlooking both ends, and a side street that connects here and here. She traced the paths with her finger. Recommend we either avoid it entirely or have additional overwatch covering those. Staff Sergeant. The interruption was gentle, but it was still an interruption. The lieutenant offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I appreciate the thoroughness, but we've got to balance risk and time. And right now Intel and partner force input say it's okay. We'll be in and out before anyone blinks. She held his gaze for half a second. Copy, sir. I'll adjust my sectors accordingly. On the roof, a junior infantry sergeant followed her up the stairs, rifle slung, helmet straps flapping loose. He was still mid-story by the time they reached the top, voice bouncing off the concrete. I'm telling you, in 09 we got into it in Mosul. None of this advisory, hearts and minds stuff. Real infantry work. Kicked down doors, cleared block after block. You'd have loved it if you were in the right MOS back then. Cruz set her rifle on its bipod, sightline already turned toward the district they'd be moving into. She plugged her headset into the radio, the city opening up to her in a wide arc. What are your sectors on this mission? She asked, eyes behind glass as she began scanning. Who's covering your 6 when you're at the midpoint? Any established exfil route if things go sideways? The sergeant shrugged, waving a hand as if batting away a fly. We'll figure it out on the ground. We always do. That's one way to do it, she said quietly, more to herself than him. Below, the call came to mount up. Engines turned over, coughing dust into the already thick air. Cruz checked the wind with her anemometer, scribbled a few notes on her range card, and adjusted her scope. Her pen paused for a second on the alley she hated. As the team stepped off, the 2 younger soldiers from earlier passed under her position. One of them glanced up, spotting her silhouette against the sky. He nudged his friend. There she is, he muttered. Our guardian angel with SPF 50. They laughed again, but it sounded thinner now that their boots were actually on the street. Cruz didn't watch them long. She traced their movement through her scope, measuring distances, logging reference markers, the rusted-out hatchback at the corner, the collapsed balcony with laundry still pinned to it, the blue door on the side street that stayed just a little too closed. Inside her room, a small hard case sat half open on a crate. As she turned to grab another magazine, the lid fell back for a second, revealing a metal resting in the foam, a bronze star with a tiny V device. The ribbon was worn, colors dulled from years of travel. Her hand snapped out, closing the case with a soft click just as the junior sergeant reappeared in the doorway. You good up here? He asked, suddenly less loud, less sure. Always, she said. Go link up with your lieutenant. Route's not going to walk itself. He gave a short nod and disappeared back down the stairs. Cruz turned back to her rifle, the city filling her scope again. Jokes faded into the background. Wind, distance, and angles took their place. She listened to the patrol check-in as it moved farther from the base, their voices light, occasionally cocky, filling the net with small talk. She checked the alley one more time. Nothing moved there yet. No shadows where they shouldn't be. No flicker of metal in a window, just empty space and potential. In the operations center, the mission was a column of text on a board. On the street, it was 15 sets of lungs and a bad route choice. On the roof, it was a series of calculations in her head, and the growing weight of knowing that if the worst-case scenario she'd sketched out in her notebook came true, the same people who joked about her now would be screaming for help later. The first sign that her worst-case scenario had arrived was the tone of the radio traffic. At first, it was routine. Position updates. Casual banter. The JTAC checking in with higher about assets availability just in case. Cruz tracked them block by block, calling out occasional observations. An open door here, a cluster of vehicles there. Her voice remained calm, professional, the way it always did. Then, as they neared the alley, something shifted. Overwatch, Viper approaching checkpoint 3, the lieutenant said, a little winded. Visual on alley. Still looks clay. Cruz's scope was already on it. The alley stared back at her, a dark slit between buildings, bright at the far end. No movement, no visible threat. That was the problem. Viper, Overwatch, she replied. Recommend you hug the north side of that intersection and bypass the alley. I've got limited visibility inside and multiple potential firing positions covering both ends. I can't guarantee Overwatch if you commit. There was a pause. She could imagine him standing at the corner, one boot already angled toward the passage. Copy your concern, Overwatch, he said. We're going through. Need to make time. Keep eyes up for us. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. Roger, she said. Eyes up. She followed their first few steps into the alley, counting. 1, 2, 3, 15 Americans, plus a handful of locals. They moved from sun into shadow, helmet cams probably adjusting exposure just as their eyes did. The PKM opened up halfway through her count. Through her scope, she saw the muzzle flash before they did, a stutter of light in a darkened second-story window. The first burst sent sparks off the opposite wall, then found flesh. A local fighter crumpled, his AK skittering away. An American at the rear jerked as rounds hit his plates, force slamming him down. Contact left. Contact left. The radio detonated with noise. Where's it coming from? Second deck. Left. Left. I'm hit. I'm hit. My leg. Cruz snapped her rifle to the source, but distance and angle made it a terrible shot. Narrow window, limited view of the gunner. She watched him feed a new belt, shoulders hunched, posture practiced. This wasn't his first ambush. Before she could find a clean line, the RPG team made their entrance. A side street, just as she'd marked. A blur of a man in a dirty shirt, shouldering a launcher. Her heart rate didn't spike, but her grip on the stock did. RPG, side street, she barked into the net. Blue door, 3 o'clock from your last man. Move. The rocket fired before they could. It arced into the burnt-out car at the alley's mouth, and the explosion choked the passage with flame and debris. The exit behind them was gone. Viper 1 is troops in contact, the RTO shouted, voice cracking. We are troops in contact at grid. His transmission overlapped with cries for a medic, someone calling out a name that didn't answer, the JTAC cursing as he tried to get higher on the line. The lieutenant tried to shout over all of it. Push forward. Push forward. We have to punch through. But Cruz's scope saw what he couldn't from his position. A small group of fighters moving at the far end of the alley, using wrecked cars and rubble as cover. One dropped prone behind a tire, bringing up an old rifle with the slow confidence of someone who knew he wouldn't have to move much today. Another set up behind a chunk of concrete, watching, waiting. Negative. Viper, you cannot push forward, she said into the chaos. You are bracketed front and rear. I count at least 3 enemy elements. PKM on your left second floor, rifle team closing your front, RPG and support on your right. If you push, you die. Overwatch, stand by, the lieutenant barked, panic bleeding through the irritation now. Down in the alley, rounds slapped into walls and ricocheted off the ground. Dust turned the air into a beige haze. The medic crawled toward a wounded soldier, Kit dragging behind him. The wounded man clutched his thigh, blood seeping between his fingers. "I can't see where they are shooting from," someone yelled. "I can't see them." On her rooftop, Cruz's world narrowed to 3 key positions. She updated her range card with quick, scribbled numbers. Distance to the PKM window, distance to the far-end rifleman, distance to the RPG team's last seen location. Wind was picking up slightly from the west, enough to matter. She set her dope, fingers moving on the turrets by instinct. "Hiya, Viper 1. The RTO gasped into his MIC request immediate CS. Request. We are boxed in. Repeat boxed in. Multiple casualties." Negative immediate CS came the reply from far away, through layers of static and bureaucracy. "Civilians in proximity. You are weapons tight until PID is confirmed and collateral minimized." Translation. They were on their own for the next 20 minutes at least. Cruz exhaled slowly. 20 minutes was an eternity in an alley like that. "Overwatch, what do you see?" A new voice on the net. Clipped, irritated. Someone from the operations center finally keying in. "I see 15 friendlies in a fatal funnel and hostiles who know this terrain better than we do," she said. "I see a PKM that will chew them up if they try to run. And I see a lieutenant who can't get his people moving because he's trying to do everything at once." There was a beat of silence. The PKM opened up again. Another punishing burst that sent chips of concrete raining down. Another shout of pain. Another voice going high with fear. "Medic, I need a tourniquet. I'm out. I'm out. I can't get a clean shot." Cruz heard one of the young soldiers who joked about her that morning. She recognized his voice now, stripped of its earlier swagger. He was pressed into the dirt, breathing too fast. "We're cut off," he gasped into the net. "We're cut off and we can't see them. We can't see anything. We're gonna lose everyone out here." His words hung over the channel like smoke. On the roof, the wind tugged at Cruz's sleeve. She could feel the concrete under her elbows, solid and cool. Through her scope, she watched the PKM gunner adjust his position, getting more comfortable. He thought he had time. He thought his victims had nowhere to go. If she kept doing what she'd been doing, offering polite suggestions, letting rank and distance dictate who led this fight, those 15 men would bleed out in a place she had flagged as deadly 24 hours earlier. She had the angles. She had the ranges. She had the experience. The only thing she didn't have was authority. Her thumb hovered over the push to talk. Then she pressed it down, harder than she needed to. "Break, break, this is Overwatch," she said, voice suddenly sharper, cutting into the overlapping transmissions. "All stations, listen up." There was a noticeable hitch in the net. "In the absence of functional control on the ground, I am assuming control of fires and movement for Viper 1 within my line of sight," she continued, each word measured. "Viper, you will follow my directions if you want to get your people out of that alley alive. Hiya, recommend you record this traffic." Somewhere in the TOC, heads turned. On the ground, the lieutenant sucked in a breath, torn between pride and survival. "Overwatch, this is operations." The irritated voice came back, quieter now. "Send your sitrep." Cruz didn't waste the opening. In 30 seconds, she painted the battlefield in crisp, precise terms: enemy positions, friendly dispositions, obstacles, potential breach points. No drama, no panic. Just facts arranged in a way that made the deadliness of the situation impossible to ignore. By the time she finished, the net sounded different. Still chaotic, still dangerous, but underneath the noise, there was a new current. The quiet gravity of someone who actually knew what needed to happen next. "Overwatch, operations. You are cleared to coordinate fires and movement for Viper 1 within IOE," the voice from higher finally said. "Viper, acknowledge." There was a short, ragged pause. Dust swirled in the alley. Somewhere, a man groaned. "Viper acknowledges," the lieutenant said at last, voice tight. "Overwatch, we're listening." The net went strangely quiet. The kind of silence that means everyone is holding their breath at the same time. Cruz adjusted the magnification on her scope, bringing the PKM window into sharper focus. She could see the gun now, the feed tray open, the belt draped like a deadly necklace. The gunner leaned in again, shouldering his weapon. Viper, Overwatch, she began, tone calm but carrying now. On my count, I need 3 of you pressed hard to the left wall. Left side only. You do not break into the center of the alley for any reason. Left wall, someone repeated, almost automatically. JTAC, pop smoke front and rear. Green if you've got it, she continued. I don't care if it feels useless in the alley. It'll break up their sight picture and mark friendlies for me. Copy. I got it, the JTC said, already fumbling a grenade out of his pouch. Cruz shifted her focus from the PKM to the broader view again. The wind had picked up just enough to shift the smoke she was planning to use as a curtain. She did the math automatically. Smoke out front in 3, 2, 1, now. A green plume erupted near the far end of the alley, then another near the burning wreck behind them. The passage filled with colored haze on top of the dust, turning the world into layers of barely visible movement. Left wall, move now, she said. 3 shapes detached themselves from the mess and slammed into the left side, shoulders scraping concrete. One stumbled, got yanked back up by the man behind him. Round smacked into the opposite wall where they'd just been. In her scope, the PKM muzzle flashed. She watched the pattern, the rhythm. The gunner was good but not perfect. He pulled slightly right with each burst. That gave her a margin. She slowed her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The PKM's window sat at just over 600 meters. Wind right to left, moderate. She dialed, compensated, settled. Gun team in tan building, 2nd floor. 3rd window from left, she whispered, more to herself than to the radio. Okay. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. The world tunneled down to crosshays and a half-visible shoulder behind a metal receiver. She rode the gunner's movement for half a second, then sent the round. The PKM's second burst stopped midstream. Through the scope, she saw the gunner jerk back, mouth opening in a silent shout, one hand going to his neck. He toppled out of view. The weapon sagged, belt still in place. Machine guns down, she said, voice flat. Viper, shift 2 more bodies to the left wall and start working toward the side street on my mark. In the alley, the soldiers closest to the wounded looked up in shock as the punishing hail of rounds from the left suddenly stopped. There was still sporadic fire from the far end, but the worst of it had been the PKM. The absence of that sound felt like someone had taken their hands off their throats. One of the younger soldiers pressed his helmet against the wall, chest heaving. Was that her? He muttered. No one answered, but a few eyes flicked skyward through the dust. Cruz didn't give the enemy time to reorganize. She swung her rifle slightly, hunting for the RPG gunner. The side street doorway was obscured by smoke, but she could track movement, shadows cutting across the opening, someone dragging the tube back. RPG team, blue door, 3 o'clock from your trail end, she called out. I have partial on one. Do not enter that intersection until I tell you. She saw him then, just a sliver of shoulder and helmet as he leaned out to look. She put the crosshays on the narrow slice of exposed flesh and squeezed. He dropped backward into the doorway, the RPG slipping from his hands. RPG down, she reported. You still have at least 1 rifleman at your front. Black shirt, rooftop low, behind a tire. I'm working him next. At the far end of the alley, the rifleman was doing exactly what she'd expected, using the chaos to pick off anyone who dared peek out. He had partial cover, firing from a makeshift rest on a chunk of concrete. She saw his barrel dip, then rise again. She led the shot this time, anticipating his next lean. The round hit him in the cheek as he turned, spinning him sideways. Front rifle is neutralized, she said. You are not clear, but your biggest threats are down. Viper, we're going to move you out of that alley through the left-hand structure 2/3 of the way up. There's a door I can't see, but I can infer from the architecture. On my count, I need 1 breacher and 2 rifles at that position. The lieutenant keyed his MIC, voice still shaky but now focused on her words like a lifeline. Copy. Identify the position. Look left, she instructed. Halfway up your current position, there's a building with a broken balcony and a rusted AC unit hanging. Under that, there should be a recessed doorway. That's your breach point. Get there. One of the sergeants squinted through dust and smoke, finally spotting the balcony she described. I see it. I see it. Good, Cruz said. On my mark, you're going to move low and fast. I'll keep heads down for you. As the breacher and his two riflemen stacked up as best they could in the cramped alley, another voice came onto the net, older, with a weight of authority that didn't come from just rank. Overwatch, this is Red Crown, the voice said from some operations node back at the larger base. Is this Staff Sergeant Cruz? She recognized the call sign. Old memories flickered, briefings, a different city, a different war. Affirmative, she answered. I still in the scope. A pause. Then, quieter, you're the one from Talafar, right? The overpass incident. It wasn't a question, not really. He'd read the reports. That's correct, sir, she said. Copy, Red Crown replied. His voice came back stronger. All stations, this is Red Crown. You will follow Overwatch's instructions without hesitation. That's not a suggestion. Down in the alley, even through the noise and fear, the message landed. Whatever doubts remained about the woman on the rooftop started to crack. Breacher, on my count, Cruz said, taking advantage of the newfound compliance. 3, 2, 1. Move. The three-man stack broke from cover, sprinting along the left wall, boots slipping in dust and debris. As they moved, Cruz shifted her aim above and beyond them, watching windows, balconies, corners. A shadow flickered in a darkened room ahead, just enough to catch her eye. She fired. A man with an old Kalashnikov fell back from the window he'd been about to use, the shot catching him in the collarbone. The breacher slammed into the recessed doorway she described. It was there, just like she'd suspected from the building's layout. Metal, half-rusted, but not fully sealed. He set a charge, hands moving on autopilot. Charge on. Stand by, Cruz said, scanning again. No new muzzle flashes. No sudden movement. Just the weight of the city watching. Do it. The blast punched a hole in the doorway, the shockwave reverberating through the alley. Dust billowed out into the already choked air. Inside? Get inside, a sergeant shouted, pushing men through the breach. One soldier froze in the alley, pressed into the wall, eyes wide. The noise, the blood, the pain. It had finally overloaded his system. He stared at the breach like it was a trap, unable to force his legs to move. Cruz saw him through her scope, saw the way his shoulders shook, how his rifle hung useless in his hands. More importantly, she saw what he couldn't. A militant slipping along a side rooftop, trying to angle for a shot down into the alley. Soldier at the breach, you with the tan shima, listen to my voice, she said, tone lowering. You are going to take 3 steps backward, then dive through that door. When I say go, you don't think, you just move. I have a man trying to shoot you. Do you understand? His breathing blasted over the net. I can't see him, he stammered. You don't need to, she replied. That's my job. You just need to move when I say. 3 steps back, then through the door. Trust me. There was a tiny pause, then a whisper. Roger. She tracked the rooftop flanker through her scope. The man was creeping along, rifle ready, eyes scanning for a target. Cruz's fingers settled on the trigger. 3 steps back, she said. The soldier obeyed, boots sliding. Go. He dove through the breach. At the same moment, the rooftop militant leaned out to fire. Cruz's shot hit him in the center of the forehead. He dropped out of sight, the round meant for the frozen soldier dying with him. Inside the building, the soldier crashed onto dusty tile, heart pounding, fully aware that something had snapped inches from his head. That was her, he breathed, half to himself. That was her. Room by room, floor by floor, the team began moving laterally through the structure instead of staying trapped in the alley. Cruz stayed with them every step of the way, calling out stairwells, warning of blind corners, putting rounds into any sign of movement that threatened their path. Under her guidance, they punched out through a side wall into a parallel street that offered better cover and multiple exit points. They moved in short bounds, wounded carried, weapons up, the earlier joking gone, replaced by grim, focused silence. By the time they reached a relatively secure courtyard where vehicles could reach them, the alley was behind them, an ugly scar in the city they'd remember for the rest of their lives. "Status, Viper?" Red Crown asked. The lieutenant keyed his MIC, voice hoarse. "Red Crown, Viper. All 15 accounted for. Multiple wounded, no keys at this time. We're out of the alley." There was an audible exhale on the net, not just from him but from half the people listening. On her rooftop, Cruz finally lifted her cheek from the stock. Her shoulder ached. A small pile of spent brass glittered beside her, warm against the concrete. The city stretched out in front of her again, strangely quiet after the storm. "Overwatch, Viper," the lieutenant said after a few seconds. "We owe you our lives." She looked at her rifle, checked the chamber out of habit, and let a simple reply carry everything she wasn't going to say aloud. "Just doing my job," she answered. The makeshift aid station was a half-gutted room with a concrete floor, a few cots, and a fan that only worked when the generator felt like cooperating. Now, in the washed-out light of late afternoon, it buzzed overhead, pushing warm air in lazy circles. The survivors sat scattered around the room, on cots, on crates, on their gear, faces streaked with dried sweat and fresh bandage tape, boots still dusty from the alley. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind the kind of quiet that only comes after everyone's had time to realize just how close it had been. Two of the younger soldiers who'd made jokes that morning sat side by side on a crate, elbows on knees. One had a graze wrapped in white around his arm. The other kept flexing his fingers as if confirming they still worked. "Did you see that PKM just stop?" one said finally. "Yeah," the other replied. "Thought it was a jam at first." "Nah," he shook his head slowly. "That was her. Had to be." A few feet away, the soldier who'd frozen at the breach stared at the floor. He could still feel the echo of the round that had snapped somewhere above him. He didn't know what the rooftop shooter had looked like. He didn't need to. The voice that had cut through the panic and talked him through those 3 steps was burned into his memory. In the corner, the medic repacked his bag, hands moving on autopilot. He'd seen worse. He'd seen better. But he couldn't shake the feeling that if that sniper hadn't been on the roof today, he'd be zipping at least one of those men into a bag instead of re-rolling gauze. The platoon leader stepped into the doorway, helmet off, hair matted with dust and sweat. He paused for a moment, taking in the scene. The bandages, the 1,000-yard stays, the weary smiles of men who'd survived something they shouldn't have. He made his way out, up the stays, back toward the rooftop. Cruz was there where she always seemed to be, sitting cross-legged beside her rifle. The city was turning golden under the setting sun, but her focus was on her weapon, hands moving again along steel and polymer, wiping carbon, checking optics. The pile of spent brass had been cleared. The only sign of what had happened earlier was the faint discoloration on her cheek where the stock had pressed all afternoon. He stopped a few feet away. For once, he didn't have a briefing or joke ready. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly. She looked up, eyes calm, expectant. "I should have listened to you about that alley," he said. "No excuses, no deflection, just the truth. My route choice almost got us killed. You kept that from happening." She studied him for a second, weighing the words. He looked different now, not younger, not older, just more aware of the weight on his shoulders. "Roger, sir," she said. "Lessons learned." He nodded, the phrase hitting a little harder than the usual post-mission cliché. "Yeah," he answered. "Lessons learned." There was a beat of silence. Wind pushed a thin veil of dust across the roof. "Thank you," he added, and this time it wasn't just professional courtesy. It was personal. "Anytime," she replied. Then she went back to checking her scope, as if the day had been no different from a long-range session. Later, in a small debrief with a handful of leaders, a field-grade officer walked through the contact, the decisions, the near misses. He spoke in the restrained language of the military: effective overwatch, critical fires coordination, decisive action under pressure. But when he briefly summarized Cruz's prior record, her time in Iraq, commendations, that long-ago overpass incident, it reframed her in the room. Suddenly she wasn't the PR sniper, or the checkbox. She was the most experienced combat shooter in that building, and always had been. Most of them just hadn't bothered to look. In the days that followed, the changes were small but real. No one made jokes when she climbed to the rooftop. When she asked to sit in on route planning, chairs shifted to make space. When she pointed at a street and said, "This makes me nervous," people listened. There were no speeches, no medals handed out in front of cameras, no social media posts about breaking barriers. Just a quiet professional going back to her notebook, updating range cards, and studying angles for the next mission. Because there would always be a next mission. Always another alley someone swore was cleared. Always another day when the difference between 14 folded flags and 14 men going home would come down to someone whose name most people wouldn't remember. The ones who'd been trapped in that alley would remember, though. They'd remember the calm female voice on the radio when everything else was screaming. They'd remember the way the machine gun stopped, the RPG went silent, and a path opened where there hadn't been one. And somewhere, watching this story play out on a screen, there'd be veterans and families nodding along, recognizing the type. The quiet one. The one no one took seriously until the day everyone did. Because in every unit, in every war, there are people like Staff Sergeant Elena Cruz. They don't brag. They don't demand respect. They just put steel on target when it counts, then go right back to cleaning their rifle. If you've ever served with someone like that, or been that person yourself, you already know the truth. Some of the most dangerous, most dependable professionals in the room are the ones who talk the least. And those are the stories worth telling.